Welcome. Today I'm going to do a brief sharpening tutorial. Now keep in mind, in my mind, there is really no substitute for hands-on training, someone to teach you to do this in person so that they can correct you as you go along. Short of that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the things that I've seen the most often people doing wrong when I was trying to teach them how to sharpen, and hopefully those things will help you get incrementally better. Now, I think that unless you're experienced at this, trying to freehand file without a guide is probably going to be challenging. Not to say that it can't be accomplished, but I would recommend that everyone get a guide and then still follow these same tips that I'm going to give you. Personally, I like to freehand file. I just like how it comes out better. But so that being said, the things that I've found that people struggle with the most is when I look at their chains, every one of these teeth looks different. Now, in order for it to cut properly, every single one of them needs to look exactly the same, and I mean identical. There shouldn't be any difference from one side of the chain to the other, or from tooth to tooth. They should all look exactly the same and be the same size. So, if your chain has different angles on both sides or different size teeth, there's a huge issue right there, and there's no way it's going to cut efficiently or straight. So, the next one, the different angles. People seem to think, and I'm not sure why, this is not the 1950s, we're not forcing people to try to use their non-dominant hand to write cursive anymore. So instead of trying to use both of your hands to sharpen, pick your dominant hand and file on the side of the chainsaw that's appropriate for that hand, and then turn the chainsaw around. Don't try to sharpen with both hands. There's no need of it, and you're just going to do a poor job, and it's going to be frustrating because there's no way you're going to sharpen a chain that's going to be useful. Dull files. So a chainsaw file is only good for a short period of time. It doesn't matter how many times you stroke with a dull file. If there is not material coming off and it doesn't feel like it's really cutting, you're not doing anything. You're just going through the motions. There's no participation grade in this application here. So if you're just making the motions and there's no cutting, there's no metal filings coming off, you're not doing anything. So save yourself the frustration, buy boxes of files instead of individuals, because the file is only going to last so long. As soon as it stops feeling like it's cutting, it probably is not cutting, so get a new one. The other is weak stroke pressure. So when I'm filing this chain, if I'm just sliding the file along and there's no resistance, you're not doing anything. Again, if you're not seeing metal filings come off, you're probably not doing anything. So, there is an angle often marked on the top of most of these chainsaw teeth. So you should do your best to mimic the exact angle of that line on top of the tooth. And that means the angle in this direction and in this direction. So if you have a chainsaw, a file guide that this is clipped into, that should do most of that for you. But if not, you're trying to hand file, you want to mimic the line that is scribed on top of the chainsaw, the cutter tooth, as closely as you can. And it should be exactly. There are circumstances to modify that angle slightly, but for circumstances of learning how to do this, try to mimic it and do it identically. Alright, so the pieces of the chain that you need to understand in order to do this, this is a cutter. You could call it a variety of different things, but it's a cutting tooth. This is a raker. This is what pulls all of the shavings out as you're cutting. This is a binding strap. And this is a driver. So when you hear reference to those things, understand that that's what they are. The guide bar, the slot in your guide bar, is reference to the size of this driver. So if you have the wrong size chain for your guide bar, it will not function properly. So this chain is a little bit too loose, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'm going to show you how to sharpen. So when I make a forward stroke, I want to be having forward angled pressure at the appropriate angle upward, and I also want to be putting pressure in the direction towards the chainsaw, because I'm trying to cut in underneath so that this tip is overhanging just slightly. So when I put pressure this way, you want to feel and hear that cutting. And my most often mistake personally is that if I'm sharpening, I will slide off to that direction because I'm trying to undercut this and I'm putting forward pressure and pressure in the direction of the chainsaw. So I often slip off that way. That's why wearing gloves is really mandatory. I often slide off this direction and hit my knuckle on the tooth right there. So that being said, when you're going to sharpen, you look at your chain, you find the tooth that has the most damage or the most wear, and you make every other tooth on the chainsaw mimic that one once you've fixed it. So if you have one tooth that's been nicked on a rock, you fix that tooth down to a degree that it is perfect once again, and then you file everything else on the saw down to that grade. So if I do 5 strokes on this one tooth right here, I'm going to then do 5 strokes on every other tooth. And that means 5 nice clean strokes where you're cutting material with each stroke. That does not mean I'm just sliding the file through and I hear it grind along the metal. It means that I'm actually cutting and feeling the resistance of it, and you see the shape of the tooth change as you file. So I can only use my right hand. My left hand is practically useless for this kind of application of fine motor skill. So I turn the chainsaw around. I'm done filing this side of the chain. I'm going to flip the saw around until it's comfortable and appropriate to where I can get the right angle again. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go along and I'm going to make the same number of strokes on this side until I've gone all the way around the chain. Now you'll be able to tell when you get back to the same where you started because the tooth will be filed down. Now, this is a raker file. This is for taking down your rakers. Personally, I don't believe that you should use a raker gauge. Some people would probably argue that with me, but I think they're too aggressive. So if you've sharpened your chain and you know without a doubt that it is sharp and should be cutting very well, and it doesn't want to cut very quickly, likely your rakers need to come down. And I suggest doing it in 2-stroke increments. So holding on to the tooth so that you're not going to damage your cutter, you want to do flat across twice on every tooth all the way around. And if that isn't enough, do another stroke or 2, but don't take them down too much. Your chain will get very chattery and it's much more apt to kick back and cause you harm. So as far as hand filing, again, I really recommend a guide. I also really recommend having somebody show you in person that really knows how to do this. And short of that, try the things that I mentioned. And if that doesn't work, we'll explore some other options. But those are the most common issues that I see with people trying to sharpen. And that should be sufficient to get you started. So give those things a try, and good luck. If you have questions and comments and feedback, please leave them below the video, and I'll do my best to answer them in a timely fashion.